Get out, old lady, my DIL screamed. The next day, I sold the house she lived in. Martha Bennett had spent nearly her entire life within the walls of the modest brick house nestled on the quiet street where she raised her 3 children. Now, at 68, the place was more than just a house. It was a treasury of memories, a monument to decades of love, loss, and endurance. Widowed in her early 50s, Martha had carried the weight of raising her kids alone, working 2 jobs to keep the household running, and planting a garden that had become her sanctuary. The creaky wooden floors whispered stories of laughter and tears, and every corner held traces of her carefully woven life. Yet, that sense of sanctity had been fraying since her youngest son, Michael, married Olivia. Olivia was a sharp contrast to Martha, youthful, energetic, and ambitious. She arrived with a polished air, designer handbags always in tow, and a network of influential friends that seemed to shimmer around her like an aura. From the first months, Martha could feel the subtle shifts in tension. The way Olivia's smiles rarely reached her eyes when Martha entered the room. The impatience in her tone whenever Martha suggested anything during family gatherings. At first, Martha tried to remind herself that change was inevitable. Michael's marriage was a new chapter, one she wanted to celebrate. But Olivia's undercurrent of disdain was palpable. She often complained about the old-fashioned feel of the house, murmured about how time moves on, and how it would be better if everyone lived in the new place Michael was talking about buying. The house, Martha's refuge, became a battlefield where she felt increasingly unwelcome. The shattering moment came one afternoon during a casual family gathering. The sun filtered through the lace curtains as relatives chatted and children played in the yard. Martha had just brought out a batch of homemade cookies, a recipe passed down from her mother, when Olivia stood abruptly, her face twisted in visible irritation. "Get out, old lady." Olivia's voice sliced through the room like a cold wind. The insult wasn't just loud, it was public, delivered with reckless cruelty. Chairs stopped scraping floors, and voices died mid-sentence as every eye fell on Martha. Her cheeks burned with a shame that felt hot enough to sear her skin. The words echoed relentlessly, bouncing off the walls of the home that was supposed to be hers too. Martha's knees felt weak, the air thick and suffocating. She searched for a response, something, anything, but the sting of humiliation left her silent. The faces surrounding her were a mixture of shock and uncomfortable avoidance. No one immediately stepped in. Slowly, Olivia's allies smirked, feeding off the tension, their eyes gleaming with a cruel kind of satisfaction. The warmth of Martha's cherished home froze over in that moment, replaced by a chilling divide she had never imagined. As she slowly gathered herself to leave the room, Martha felt less like a mother or grandmother and more like an intruder in her own life. The humbling wound of those words didn't just cut deep. They threatened to erase the dignity she had clung to through all the years of sacrifice. And as the afternoon turned to evening, a dark cloud settled over her heart, while the seeds of an inevitable confrontation quietly took root. The day after Olivia's cruel outburst lingered painfully in Martha's mind, the sting of humiliation refusing to fade. At breakfast, the usual comfort of routine was shattered. Her hands trembled slightly as she poured tea, each clink of porcelain echoing too loudly in the quiet kitchen. The house felt colder, the walls closing in, suffocating her with the memory of harsh words. She avoided looking at the empty chair where Michael usually sat, knowing he hadn't stopped Olivia from humiliating her. Instead, he merely glanced away, silent and distant. The gossip that swirled among relatives and neighbors was merciless. Whispered comments floated through family WhatsApp groups, twisting the story worse with every retelling. "That poor woman, treated like a stranger in her own home," one message read. "How could she put up with that?" asked another. The subtle support was like a small flame in an otherwise gloomy room, but it wasn't enough to warm her frozen spirit. Martha carried the weight of the incident like a stone in her chest, the pain of being judged and rejected by people she had loved and trusted. At the weekly market, she tried to keep her head down, but the sharp eyes of a few townsfolk met her with pity or worse, curiosity. "I heard about the scene," said Mrs. Weaver, her voice hesitant, yet tinged with sympathy. "It's hard to imagine Olivia being so harsh." Martha forced a tight smile, but said nothing. Inside, she felt a raw vulnerability that threatened to consume her. The house was supposed to be her sanctuary, a place where she was safe, surrounded by memories and love, not a stage for public shame. Back at home, Olivia's behavior didn't improve, it intensified. She would make pointed comments within earshot, dismissive jokes about Martha's age and irrelevance. During family dinners, Olivia often ignored Martha entirely, speaking only to Michael or her own friends as if Martha was invisible. Some relatives took Olivia's side, choosing to avoid controversy or simply because they were charmed by Olivia's polished persona. Martha's once secure place in the family seemed to crumble further with each passing day. There was an unbearable loneliness to it all. Martha found herself retreating into silence, wrestling with doubt and hurt. Was she truly an annoyance now? Had the years of love and hard work been reduced to nothing by a few harsh words? But beneath the despair, a small flicker of resolve began to grow. The unfairness of it all sparked something deep within her, a quiet rebellion that whispered she didn't have to accept being cast out. Some nights, she would stay awake long after everyone was asleep, scrolling through legal advice websites and community forums, gathering scraps of information. What were her rights? Could Olivia legally force her out? The questions swirled in her mind, and while she had no clear answers yet, she knew one thing: she wouldn't let this be the end of her story. If you've ever felt pushed around or underestimated because of your age or circumstances, you know how hard it is to hold on to dignity in those moments. Martha's story reminds us all that resilience can start with the smallest spark, even when the world seems to be closing in. Sometimes, a moment of pain plants the seed for unexpected strength. In the weeks that followed, Martha's days became a delicate balancing act between holding on to her fading sense of belonging and striking out into unknown territory. She tried to maintain some semblance of normalcy, attending church services and the book club she had joined years ago, but the shadow of Olivia's harsh words and cold glances accompanied her everywhere. When she visited the grocery store, she caught herself avoiding eye contact, her pride warring against the ache of repeated rejection. One afternoon, she mustered the courage to confront Michael. They sat in the living room, the knife-edge silence between them heavier than the muffled ticking of the clock on the wall. Martha's voice wavered. "Michael, I need to understand. Why did you let Olivia speak to me that way?" Michael looked away, discomfort flickering across his features. "Mom, it's complicated. Olivia's stressed about the house and the future." "It's not personal," he said, but the words rang hollow. Martha felt crushed, not by the explanation, but by his passivity. Unable to find solace in family, she began to research her legal standing quietly, armed only with a worn laptop and determination. Hours were spent reading documents about property rights, inheritance laws, and tenant protections. The technical jargon was overwhelming, and early attempts to get clarifications at the local courthouse were met with confusing responses. Often, she felt the weight of ignorance settling on her shoulders, each bureaucratic hurdle tightening the noose of helplessness. Still, every small piece of information kindled a flicker of hope. During this time, a neighbor, Mrs. Perkins, noticed Martha's retreat and offered kind words that pierced through her fog of despair. "You've lived here far longer than Olivia has. Don't forget that," she said one morning, handing Martha a fresh batch of homemade bread. People forget respect once greed takes hold, but the truth always surfaces. Small gestures like these reminded Martha of a community that still cared, a subtle fortress forming around her. She attempted to communicate with Olivia directly, hoping to ease tensions, but each conversation ended with veiled sarcasm or outright dismissal. This house belongs to Michael now, not to you. Olivia snapped once, her eyes flashing with disdain. The rejection was a bitter pill, but also a clear sign that negotiation wasn't an option. As the days dragged on, Martha's uncertainty grew, yet so did a quiet resilience. She reminded herself that she had survived harder storms, that this was just another test. Amid the turmoil, small victories appeared like fragile shoots, pushing through stone. Martha started documenting everything: the hostile encounters, Olivia's comments, the volatile dynamics of the household. Though it felt tedious, she sensed this archive might one day serve a greater purpose. The process also empowered her in an unexpected way, shifting her from silent victim to active participant in her own story. Yet the anxiety of impending eviction loomed like a storm cloud. Each knock on the door quickened her heartbeat. Each whisper in the neighborhood felt like a judgment passed without trial. But beneath the fear, a determination was solidifying. Martha refused to be erased. Not yet. Though shadows of doubt crept into her thoughts, the spark of hope she nurtured promised that the story was far from over. Sometimes the hardest battles start quietly, in the silence between fears and courage. The tension in the Bennett household reached a breaking point one gloomy evening, when Olivia's patience finally snapped into outright hostility. Martha sat quietly in the living room, her knitting resting idly in her lap, trying to ignore the mounting unease she sensed in the air. Michael and Olivia were whispering sharply in the kitchen, their voices low, but tense enough to seep through the thin walls. Moments later, the front door slammed with a force that jolted Martha upright. Olivia strode in, eyes blazing with a fury that left no room for calm. "This ends tonight," she declared in a voice sharp as broken glass. "You don't belong here anymore, Martha. I've said it before, and now it's final. Get out." The words hit like a punch, raw and unyielding. Martha, heart pounding, clasped the edges of her chair, trying to anchor herself in the storm. Michael stood silently by Olivia's side, his expression conflicted but unyielding. The family's gathering for dinner became an unbearable display of division, with relatives who once cherished Martha now casting furtive glances, unwilling or too afraid to intervene. Some even echoed Olivia's sentiments in hushed tones, painting Martha as an obstacle to progress, a relic clinging to a past that no longer mattered. The weight of isolation pressed down hard. Martha's world seemed to crumble overnight. The house that had cradled her memories and dreams morphed into a battleground where she was cast not as a matriarch, but as an intruder. Desperation seeped into her bones as the relentless pressure escalated. She felt smaller, diminished by the relentless wave of rejection, humiliation crashing over her with ceaseless force. Yet, amid the despair, a small voice within refused to be silenced. That night, long after the house had emptied into restless sleep, Martha sat in the dim glow of the lamp, her mind racing through possibilities. She knew the stakes had risen too high to stay silent or passive any longer. It was time to fight, but on her own terms. Slowly, she retrieved the old dusty box tucked away in the attic, a box filled with documents, letters, and the carefully preserved will her late husband had left. The faded ink and yellowing pages suddenly felt like a beacon in the dark. As she pored over the papers, a revelation struck. The house was not simply Michael's inheritance in the straightforward way Olivia assumed. The will included conditions, clauses ensuring Martha's right to reside there, protections that had been overlooked or ignored in the rush for control. The realization ignited a spark of power and possibility within her. Still, the path ahead was daunting. The emotional toll of weeks of rejection, intertwined with the uncertainty of legal battles. Could she really stand up to Olivia and Michael? Would the law be on her side? The fear of losing everything simmered alongside a newfound determination. Martha's struggle encapsulated more than a fight for property. It was a fight for dignity and belonging. If you've ever felt pushed to your limits, doubted your strength in the face of overwhelming adversity, Martha's story reminds us that even in our darkest moments, the seeds of resilience can take root. Sometimes our greatest battles come disguised as humiliation, but they can also pave the way for profound courage and transformation. Taking that first step toward standing up for oneself often feels impossible. Yet it's the moment where true change begins.